Welcome to my house for another Amazing Stories Unwrapped. The new year is only 3 days old, yet it's filled with so much wonderful potential. We're here to encourage you with the good news, with the best chapters, the best lines of your amazing personal story are still waiting to be written. Today I'd like to talk to you about a life principle that's often neglected in our narcissistic age. We'd all like to have the starring role, but there's usually only one or two people who will ever get star billing in any show. Today I'd like to give a shout out to all those who play a supporting role, a bit part, the behind the scenes people who never get the applause or the recognition. But without all the people who do the unglamorous, the unseen jobs in life, nothing would ever get done. The administrative assistant, the accountant, the driver, the caterer, the letter carrier, the repair person, the stay-at-home mom, or any of millions of other people who faithfully work behind the scenes every day to make sure that life works smoothly. Now, if you're one of those nameless, faceless folks who get up every day to do the jobs that don't get much notice, but make life better for the rest of us, I want to encourage you today. God is watching, and He's pleased with you. Now, if you listen carefully, you might even hear heaven applauding your faithful work, even though people don't. Now, today I want to give you the gift of a great story from my new one-year book of amazing stories, a story that I think will really encourage you. I call it His Sister's Shadow. It seemed that the boy from Nebraska was consigned to play second fiddle. He was a toddler when his mother dragged him to fetch his sister from ballet class. The 4-year-old boy found a pair of discarded dance slippers in the corner of the classroom. After he discovered that he could stand on his tiptoes in those slippers, just like his sister, he spent the rest of his childhood mimicking that girl. He would dance in Adele's shadow for the next 30 years. Now, when the talented 8-year-old girl and her little brother made a splash in Omaha, their stage mother took her little meal tickets to the Big Apple. The young vaudeville hoofers debuted in an act with a clunky title, Juvenile Artists Presenting an Electric Musical Toe-Dancing Novelty. They appeared in second-tier vaudeville shows, forgettable Broadway musicals, and mediocre operettas for 30 years. What favorable press they got always focused on beautiful Adele. When she ran off to London to marry an English lord, her scrawny brother was left to dance alone. Going solo was a rude awakening. One critic wrote, "The two were better than the one." Fortunately for that scrawny boy, his old friends Ira and George Gershwin found a place for him in their Broadway shows. The middle-aged hoofer finally began to shine. The Gershwins encouraged their friend that he was now ready for the big time. So he boarded a train for Hollywood. Studio head David O. Selznick was on the road when Adele's brother took a screen test for RKO Pictures. An assistant was unimpressed. He scribbled a note that has become part of movie lore. Can't act, slightly bald, also dances. Though distressed by his big ears and his bad chin line, Selznick was so excited about his dancing that he offered Adele's little brother a contract. The rest is the stuff of Hollywood legend. This hoofer from vaudeville would never again be a second fiddle to anyone. Moviegoers might have thought that Fred Astaire from Omaha was an overnight sensation, but he had paid his dues for 30 years while dancing in the shadows of his sister, Adele. He would go on to dance with legendary elegance across the silver screen with the greatest dancers in Hollywood, but they would always take second billing as his partners. His most famous partner was Ginger Rogers, who famously quipped to a reporter, "I did everything Fred Astaire did, only backwards, and did high heels." But she was never as famous as Mr. Astaire, who Russian ballet star Rudolf Nureyev called America's greatest dancer. Mikhail Baryshnikov praised him as perfection. And famous choreographer George Balanchine called him the greatest dancer in the world. Now, perhaps today you're lost in someone's shadow. I want to challenge you to make the most of it. It was in Adele's shadow that Fred Astaire learned how to dance solo. Now, perhaps you're destined to always play second fiddle. That's okay too. Remember, Fred Astaire could never dance backwards and in high heels like Ginger Rogers. And when you recall the amazing story of Fred Astaire, the greatest dancer in Hollywood history, remember that until today, you most likely never heard of Adele Astaire. So make this your credo. If I'm called to play second fiddle, I'll play it like a Stradivarius. I like what the ancient Israelite king Solomon said in the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. People should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God, whether you're the CEO or the administrative assistant. You know, when I was in New York, there was a garbage strike. After a few days of litter and stink, we all discovered that garbage collectors were far more important to our life than lawyers and doctors and Broadway superstars. I always want to remember that when God's son Jesus came to earth, he could have been born in a palace. He could have lived with royalty, with the hoi polloi of life, with the power brokers of life. Instead, he chose an old blue-collar carpenter by the name of Joe to be his adopted father. He chose an unwed teenage mother by the name of Mary to raise him. He chose to be born in a cave in the back of an inn. He chose to be born among barnyard animals, to be worshipped by shepherds who were the outcast of society. Then he chose to grow up in a hillbilly town in what was the Appalachian part of northern Israel, to be a carpenter. And then when he went off into ministry, he chose people like fishermen and tax collectors to be his followers. He hung out with prostitutes and with gangsters, and sat down to eat with beggars and lepers, the least, the last, and the lost. You see, I believe that God loves the little people of this world, that God identifies with them more than the big, mighty players that we often applaud and recognize. I want to close by reminding you that there can only be one commanding general, only one CEO, only a handful of people who get top billing in a play or a movie. But I can tell you this, if it weren't for the privates and the corporals, the foot soldiers, no battle would ever be won. If it weren't for, well, the administrative assistants, the people who work in the mailroom, no corporation would ever get its job done. And if it weren't for the cameramen, the caterers, the film cutters, the people behind the scenes, no movie would ever make it to the big screen. So if you're one of those people like Fred Astaire who dance in the shadows of someone else, you keep dancing. You're important. Fred Astaire never would have danced across the screen with such elegance and grace if he hadn't had partners like Ginger Rogers and others to dance with him. So here's my shout out to you. Heaven is applauding, and so am I. All those who are willing to do their job faithfully, even if nobody recognizes it. Especially shout out to moms who stay at home and raise kids. You're the most important people in the world. Well, you have a great day, a great weekend. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being part of this wonderful, wonderful, amazing story. The man who danced in the shadows of his sister.